Today, Dr. Mark Fishbein, Professor of Biology, is joining us to talk about milkweeds. Mark, welcome to Oklahoma Gardening.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Kim.
I've learned already quite a bit about milkweeds, and they're really a fascinating group of plants.
Yeah, I've been studying milkweeds for quite a while, and I thought I might talk a little bit today about the diversity of milkweeds and some of their interactions with insects. Milkweeds are maybe a little bit more diverse than many people are aware of. They're a very common plant in the prairies of North America, and we have an example of that right here with the butterfly weed. But that's just a tip of the iceberg. There's over 130 species of milkweeds in North America, and the milkweed family to which they belong actually has thousands of species, most of which are tropical vines.
Where did the milkweed family or group originate?
We think they originated in the tropics with these tropical vines, possibly in Africa or Asia. And what's I think really interesting about our native milkweeds is that they originated in Africa, somehow migrated to North America, and then diversified very much here, leading to the 130 species we have in North America.
Amazing how far a little plant can travel.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Well, let's take a look at some of the more familiar and then relatives of milkweed.
Okay.
Start with our native.
Yeah, so this is Asclepias tuberosa, the native butterfly weed, and it's pretty much done doing what it's going to do this year. But we can see the characteristic milkweed pod. That's the fruit that contains the seeds. And when that fruit opens up, it's going to release many seeds that have long hairs on them and help them disperse.
Perhaps that's how they made it from
Yes,
Africa.
maybe they flew from Africa with their seeds.
And you have some other plants that to me don't look much like a milkweed. Tell me about some of these.
Yes, this is a plant called Hoya. There's many, actually hundreds of species of Hoya as well. Some of them are commonly cultivated ornamental plants. They're tender tropical plants. They grow in tropical Southeast Asia. And actually, naturally, they would be growing on the trunks of trees in wet forests, but they grow quite well in pots on windowsills as well.
Yeah, and they have a really beautiful flower.
Beautiful flowers, yeah.
And then you have a vining type, which also has an interesting flower. Tell me about
This is a vine from Mexico, and this sort of exhibits what, if you were to say what's a typical milkweed plant in the family, it's not our common milkweed from the prairies, but it's a vine from the tropics that might look something like this. And this plant grows in very hot regions, often on lava flows, has these very thick, corky stems that might help protect them from the heat during the hot time of the year.
Yeah, that base is very interesting. And also, again, we have the very characteristic seed pods that we see on our native milkweeds.
That's
as well.
right. As diverse as the milkweeds are, their fruits are always going to look like that.
Okay. Now, I was very surprised to find out that this plant is a milkweed relative. Tell us about the
Isn't this
carrion
thing
flower.
amazing? This flower is this big, and it's growing on this plant with these thick succulent stems, no leaves to speak of on this plant. And I think it would be natural for someone to walk up to this plant and say this is a cactus with a very bizarre flower stuck on it.
Yes, and I've always called it the carrion cactus, and you correct me and called it carrion flower.
Yes.
We have another
Yes, this is
smaller
another
one.
relative here. These are two different genera. These are all native to southern Africa and Madagascar, and again growing in very dry habitats for the most part. So why do we think these are milkweeds and not cacti? If we were to study these flowers in detail, we'd see they actually have the same sorts of structures that our native milkweeds have.
And when we look at this and look at a milkweed flower, we don't really see that, but I'm sure if we kind of got a microscope and looked
maybe
more closely.
more apparent to the expert than to a more casual inspection. But yeah, they have all the same arrangement of parts that a normal milkweed flower would have.
Now over here we have another plant that, from a casual observer, it has a similar plant architecture to the milkweeds, but in fact is not a milkweed.
Not a milkweed.
It's a euphorbia, and I suppose if we look at the flowers, that's where we would see the difference.
Yeah, yes, there's a great difference. These flowers are actually very, very tiny and grouped and with no petals actually, and they're grouped together into a very distinctive inflorescence that is typical of euphorbias. But you pointed out the architecture as being similar to the prairie milkweeds, and they have another feature, of course,
Yeah,
that
go ahead and break that open.
is common to milkweeds as well, and that's the milky sap. So one might be inclined to call this a milkweed for good reason, but this is not closely related to the milkweeds at all. And if we were to do the same thing with a milkweed leaf, we would see why milkweeds are called milkweed. And again, we can see the milky sap coming out of these leaves.
And what does the sap do for the plant?
So this is a trait that's evolved many times in flowering plants to, in most cases, provide toxic chemicals and a sort of very unpleasant gooey substance that would deter insects or other animals from eating them. Okay. And in both cases, these plants would be toxic and pretty well defended against insects.
But there are a few insect specialists who can live on the milkweed. Why don't we go take a look at those?
Let's do that.
Well, Mark, I certainly see a lot of butterflies and bees and other visitors to our milkweeds throughout the year.
Yes, there's often a feeding frenzy on milkweed flowers. In this tropical blood flower, the yellow cups are nectar cups, and it's a very rich resource that insects just love.
And then, of course, we mentioned there's some specialist feeders that, and now they tolerate that milky sap, those toxins.
Yeah, one would think these plants would be very well protected against being eaten because they have that sticky latex and it's loaded with bad chemicals. But there's no keeping the insects back. They've evolved the ability to not only feed on these plants but make use of the toxins. So
perhaps the most well-known is the monarch
butterfly. Exactly. So those caterpillars will feed on the milkweed leaves. In fact, they must feed on milkweeds. That's the only plant that they'll eat. And then they'll take the toxic chemicals, store them, and when they metamorphose into butterflies, then the butterflies are protected against their predators.
Okay, and birds know not to eat them because they are also poisonous.
That's right.
It's very interesting. Now, all of our monarchs have flown south for the winter, but we do have some other insects on here. There's a caterpillar, and well, I collected one. That one's not behaving, but I have one here in my hand.
Oh, that
we
one's
can look
easier to get a look at. Yeah, this is a tiger moth caterpillar, and actually right next to it is a milkweed beetle. And I think what is not well known is that monarchs are not the only insects that are able to not only feed on milkweeds, but store those toxic chemicals and use them in their defense. And both of these species do so as well.
Okay, and there's also an aphid, and I have a few of them on here. These bright yellow aphids, I see them on the tips of our milkweed a lot.
They're not your run-of-the-mill aphid that you would find on most of your other garden plants. These are bright yellow, and I guess one thing that we could notice by looking at all three of these insects is red and yellow and black colors. And these insects are using those colors to warn their potential predators that in fact they are toxic and they shouldn't be eaten. The same colors that we see in a monarch butterfly.
Absolutely. Isn't nature remarkable?
Indeed, indeed.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all these wonderful facts about milkweed with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I sure enjoyed it.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.